We're going to go ahead and get started here. Representative Miller would like to address the committee before we get started on our business today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was paying my penance through fine chocolate today. You'll see them down here at the end of the table, and everybody's welcome to 2 pieces. I did want to put in a plug for a locally owned business that's very handy for all the legislators. Those come from a little shop called Hazel Hill, which is just 1/2 block away on the 700 block of Kansas. It's a perfect place if you're still looking for something for your Valentine. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Let's see here. We have Representative Neighbor is online. Can you wave if you can hear me? All right. Very good. Thank you. And we got 2 committee members coming in right now, so we'll wait until they take their seats. All right. So we are going to go ahead and open House Bill 2051, which is the providing for the vacancy in the offices of State Treasurer and Insurance Commissioner for statewide district convention. I will go to Revisor Heim for an overview, and this will give us a reminder what this bill is.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, this bill provides that instead of the governor basically appointing a vacancy in the Commissioner of Insurance office or the State Treasurer, that there would be a state party delegate convention, and that those state party delegate conventions would pick the person to fill the vacancy. If the vacancy is a third party, then the shall be filled by the governor, who shall appoint a suitable person to serve the unexpired term. So if they was an independent candidate, in other words, the governor still would appoint. The language in section 2 and 3 just amends current law to provide for that policy change. I might make a comment to the committee about balloon amendments at this point in time. I will not prepare a balloon amendment for if there's conferees that suggested an amendment and so on. I will need a legislator to actually request that amendment in order for me to do it ahead of time before the committee. And just one other heads up, typically, the sooner you can get the proposed amendment to me, the better. But if it's not done within at least an hour before the committee meeting, it's going to be a crapshoot whether or not I can get it done or not. I've got my committee secretary working, or not I've got my secretary working on a balloon amendment right now that I don't have in my hands. So for 2051, but anyway, that's just a heads up. Some committees, there's a lot of bills that conferees suggest amendments for. There hasn't been that many in this committee, but just so the committee knows that if you're interested in an amendment, you need to get a hold of me and give me a little bit of warning so I can prepare it.
All right. Thank you, Revisor. Are there any questions for the Revisor at this time? Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And my questions might be answered if I was able to fly spec the actual bill. But it's my understanding these 2 offices are both 4-year terms, correct?
That's correct.
And is there a midterm election when they vacate the office before such and such a date? Or
I believe there is.
Do they fill it? Let's say there's 3 years left and it gets filled. Is there a midterm election then, or do they serve out the remaining 3 years based on the appointment?
I'm not sure I can answer that. Maybe the Secretary of State's office, if they're listening, can, but I can check it out. But off the top of my head, I think there would be a midterm election, but I don't know for sure.
The chair will recognize Ms. Copal.
Mr. Chairman, let me confirm with our elections division and I'll get right back to you guys.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right, are there any other follow-up questions for the revisor at this time? Seeing none. Oh, no, Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just wondering this, well, you just mentioned subsection C, where if the person vacating the office is an independent, the governor will appoint a suitable person. Is that person, is it like up for grabs? That person could be any party or independent in that case?
Representative Collins, it would be the same as it is right now. The governor has the ability to appoint, so the governor can pick for a vacancy for treasurer and commissioner of insurance, and that just would be a continuation of current law. The treasurer, for example, was a Republican that filled the office, and the lieutenant governor was appointed to fill. So,
thank you very much.
All right, committee, are there any further questions for the revisor before we start working on the bill? Seeing none, thank you, Revisor Heim. So, committee, what is the will of the committee at this time for House Bill 2051? The chair recognizes Representative Berquist.
For any possible discussion, I'd like to make a motion to move this HB 2051 out for consideration on the floor.
Favorably?
Favorable for passage.
Okay. Do I have a second? All right, I have a second from Representative Dodson. Discussion committee. So I actually do have an amendment, but I fear it might not be completely prepared at this time. Is that the case, Mr. Heim? And then if that is the case, then I will explain what my conceptual amendment will be.
Mr. Chairman, I actually have the amendment, I think. I haven't proofread it. I can email it to the committee secretary, and she can email it to the committee if we can get it done that way.
Yes, please. Send it to Dana, and then Dana will email that to the committee. So committee stand by while we are waiting on that amendment to be sent to all of us. In the meantime, I will explain exactly what my amendment does. On page 1 of the bill, line 14, it says, such convention shall be called within 21 days of notice that a vacancy has occurred or will occur. I am striking the word called and instead replacing called with convene. So basically, it's one of those deals of just technical language kind of cleanup, making sure that people actually have the convention within that 21-day period, not just calling it within a 21-day period. And then additionally, I'm also going to be adding a new subsection in here, which basically says that the convention will have the vote as a secret ballot, and that it'll be a majority vote who ends up winning said convention. All the rest of this process would be left up to the party as to if they're going to allow candidate speeches or whatever else they want to do. But I think we need to at least bare minimum have a standard of the person needs to win by a majority vote, and also allow some anonymity amongst the party delegates so that there's no potential retribution or what have you from folks. So that's basically what my amendment will do. You should have just hopefully received it in your emails. I just got mine. So now that I've, Revisor Heim, would you like to go ahead and fill in any blanks that I may have missed?
Mr. Chairman, I think you covered it. The new subsection B is part of some language that's already in the district convention statute in 253902, and I've just cabbaged onto that language, some of it anyway, but it says the election shall be by secret ballot. The person elected shall be the one who receives the majority of all votes cast. If no person receives the majority, the balloting shall continue. Each committeeman, committeewoman of the party shall be entitled to vote, and so on. No precinct shall be represented or shall vote by proxy. The convention may adopt rules necessary to govern the procedure, voting, counting, and so on. Anyway, that's
All right.
the gist of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Heim. I will probably ask that we modify the language just slightly. Instead of saying committee man and committee woman, say something along the lines of state delegate.
Sure.
Okay. All right. I am looking for a second to that amendment. Second from Representative Berquist. All right. We are in discussion for the amendment. Is there any discussion? I believe I saw Representative Parker's hand earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once I read the text of the amendment, my question was answered. I was just going to ask if there was sort of provisions for runoffs or multiple ballots if no one received a majority, and I see that's in the text. Thank you.
Fantastic. Are there any further questions? Representative Bishop. I can't hear you. Can you turn your mic on?
I beg your pardon, Mr. Chairman. So in other words, this amendment that has just been emailed to us is not the wording of the amendment that we're going to be voting on.
Everything will be the same except for changing the word committee man and committee woman to state delegate. You're welcome. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm familiar with special elections where committee men and committee women cast ballots. In fact, I went to one not too long ago, came out pretty good. I'm not familiar with a state convention utilizing delegates or qualified delegates, the people who would be qualified to vote at such a convention. Are those spelled out in statute somewhere?
I believe the language is in a different statute under 2309. Revisor Heim, can you help assist me with state delegates?
The check message, whatever that is. Did you receive a check?
Mike's not quick enough on speed these days to read that.
No.
Revisor Heim, on that or not?
I'm still looking.
Thank you.
All opposed say no. Motion carried. The yes votes post Owens, Hoheisel, Highberger, Carmichael, no comment. Now let's look at 2152. If you're ready,
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have my hand raised, and so when he is done, if I could ask a question. Thank you.
I'll put you on the list. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're waiting on the revisor to check. So everybody, oh, yeah, everyone should still be online that we need. All right, so committee, while the revisor is looking real quick, the Secretary of State's office has given us an answer to what was sent earlier. Actually, Ms. Gopal, could you actually go ahead and send that or that chat message again, because I just launched a new WebEx meeting here, so I don't have your former chat. Or you can just read it out loud. It's up to you. Katie, are you having technical difficulties? Okay.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, our WebEx just completely crashed. Would you mind rephrasing the question for us?
I believe you may have sent something in the chat a few moments ago, or a few minutes
Yes.
ago.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Technology is great until it's not. I have Brian Caskey with us here. The statute that would answer Representative Miller's question is 25-312. However, it would fall under 25-312. However, we recognize that statute may not fully answer his question. So there's the full disclosure there.
Was that to his question that he just asked, or was that to the question that he asked at the beginning of the meeting regarding if there's a special election held for those individuals, if they, do they run for the next available election if, say, they only serve for a year and the next election is 4 years later, do they have to run in that second term like we saw a state senator do a few years ago?
Sure. I'm going to hand that over to Brian real quick.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, committee. 25-312 is the law that governs vacancies for state office. And that law says that if there's a vacancy prior to the general election, halfway through the term, that the vacancy would only occur until the next time that there's a statewide election. So for example, if there's a 4-year term and the vacancy occurs in year 1 of the term, the appointment would only last until the next time there's a statewide general election, and then there would be an election for the remainder of the unexpired term. Sorry, that was a little wordy. 25-312 is the law that governs that currently.
Did that answer your question, Representative?
Yes, for now, yes. Thank you.
House Bill 2876 relates to sureties and would the person brought in on a bond is supposed to be 32. So right now it provides that a court in any county. This would clarify that it's.
Is that feedback from another committee that we're hearing? Oh, okay. Cindy is, well, yeah, you want to, okay, thank you for muting yourself. I appreciate that. Okay, so Revisor Heim, have you been able to locate anything about the state delegate question?
I have not. I'm not sure it's defined clearly in the statute, so.
All right, Representative Miller.
Well, I'll go ahead and make a statement now that applies to that last answer. I don't mind working this bill today, but given that the nature of these balloon amendments not necessarily being exact, that answer right there. So if we could work it as far as we can work it, but delay final action until we've got the final copy in front of us, I'd appreciate it. And I don't know that there's any particular urgency to get this bill out, or I wouldn't necessarily be bringing up that point. But anyway, that's my comment, Mr. Chairman.
All right, thank you, Representative Miller. Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm a little confused. When they convene, we change the wording on committee men, committee women. But how many are there on that committee, and is that spread out throughout the whole state? I really don't know what that committee is.
Yes, so basically it's the delegation for the entire state party. is what it is. And so that state party is made up of each of the congressional districts and representation from there. So basically, the lowest rung in each party is the precinct committee men and women, and then those make up our precincts. And then there's a congressional party for the Republicans. I don't know how the Democrats do it, but there's a congressional party for the Republicans. And then after that congressional delegation, you have a state delegation, and that is the delegation that basically votes on the Republican Party platform here in the state of Kansas and adopting those items therein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Miller.
I wanted to butt in right there, just if these delegates are the same, if the reference to delegates here is a reference to our executive committee, which is comprised of people from congressional districts, but in addition to that, a large number of elected office holders have a position, myself, for all the Democrat representatives, senators, and so forth are members of that executive committee. I don't know if that's consistent with what we're doing here, or the a state delegation convention has separate membership. That was the purpose of my question earlier, is I just don't know who exactly that is, and whether it's geographically level or what. That's why I say I don't mind working the bill today, but before I wanted to vote on the final action, I'd like to know exact answers to those kinds of questions. Thank you.
And what we can do is get as far as we can on this bill today, and then we can, you know, come back to it next week if that gives you time to craft a specific amendment for however the Democrat Party labels your executive committee or what have you, so that you can have more specific language for how the Democrat Party operates. Then we can try to facilitate that, I think.
Well, if I craft the amendment, it'll just be me voting.
Well, I mean, hey, you can try that too. We'll leave that to the will of the committee. So, all right.
I've got, can I make a comment?
Proceed, sir.
The language that's suggested in the balloon amendment is taken directly from 253905, subsection C, which deals with a vacancy that occurs in either the governor or the lieutenant governor after the primary but before the general election. So I don't know. I don't think you're going to find a definition of state party delegates as such in the statute, but if I have more time, I'm guessing that it's party rules that dictate that, but I will, I see Katie shaking her head, so.
Okay, so basically.
A definition in the statutes.
So basically, 25-3905C is what we currently have on the books for if a gubernatorial candidate passes away between a primary and a November election, it allows this state party delegates to convene, and we already have something like that on the books. So I guess if that's the case, then hopefully due to current law and interpretation, both parties should be verbiage of this amendment.
That would be my understanding. I mean, and I don't, a lot of the statutes that dealt with party organization and so on have been repealed because we thought that these are private, independent kinds of things, and states should not really be regulating them. So.
Yeah, I believe that was a Supreme Court case. Okay, so we're going to go to Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just a question on clarification on this. So is this going to, tie the hands of any governor of any party when they get in there? And I use as an example, what if there was a Republican governor next year, in the vote, and but the Secretary of the Treasury was a Democrat? So that would mean that if that Democrat left beforehand, then the delegation would have to come together. Is that correct? Are you tying the hands of the governor that is serving the state?
I
'Cause
believe
it can
that we
work
are.
both. It
Yeah,
can
I
work
understand.
both
I
ways.
understand your question, Representative. We are, I think, allowing an equitable process to happen going forward, so that Republic in your scenario, that Republican governor wouldn't put a Republican into the treasurer's position, and it would allow the Democrat Party to select who they want in that position, and ultimately reflecting the will of the voters, because the will of the voters put a Democrat inside the treasurer's office, then it should, a Republican in your scenario should not replace that Democrat with another Republican.
Do you feel that's tying the hands of the governor?
I feel like it's a more democratic process.
I also agree with Representative Miller. I think there are more questions to answer than that we can't find answers to yet. It's maybe this, maybe that. Laws from a long time ago, and I know each party has changed some of their ways of doing things. And I would also like to ask that information be allowed to flow over and go into Tuesday, so that we all have a better understanding and picture of what this affects. Unintended consequences happen from this that would cause a problem beyond what we're suggesting. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Just a reminder, committee, we are still on the amendment, not the overall bill itself. Is there further, Representative Parker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I apologize if I'm adding more confusion to this. I hope it's a simple question. The Secretary of State's office comment on currently, if someone vacates the office and essentially the appointment is only until the next 2-year election. Can you clarify, would your amendment also, it function that way? If the office was vacated in the first year of a 4-year term, would the appointment by the delegates only last until the next even year election, or in that scenario, would it be a 3-year, finish the rest of the term appointment?
With the way that I currently understand everything, it is effective until the next election. The delegate selection would be effective until the next election.
All right,
The
when you
voters.
say next election, do you mean the next regularly scheduled election of that term, or just the next even year election? So in essence, would that, I guess, midterm election take place for finishing the last 2 years of the term?
Sorry, I was talking to my vice chair. What was your?
I'm sorry, I just wanted to clarify. You said until the next election. I just wanted to clarify. Until
The next
it should be 4-year election, or the next even year election, just for finishing the last 2 years.
My understanding is it would be the next even year election. It would not be during a local election or anything like that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, I have Representative Miller.
I think Mr. Heim did point us to the appropriate statute that tells us as much as it can about who would vote, except the only thing it tells us for purposes of this momentary discussion is it tells us it's the state party committee members. It does not spell out who is a member of the state party committee. And I would like to have that from both parties before we take final action, because I'm not sure who's on my party. I definitely am not aware of who makes up the Republican State Committee, but I would only be guessing about who's even on my own party. So, and I would like to know who makes up that committee so I can analyze it for whether or not it's a fair representation of people across the state or members of my party across the state, or whether it's weighted heavily towards, for lack of a better word, the kingpins. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Lehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I call the question on the amendment.
All right, the question has been called. I believe this is non-debatable. And so all of those in favor, and just for those new members, I will, okay, real quick. For new members, calling the question means that you're calling an end to debate. It means that you're putting the subject matter to a vote. But first, before doing that, we vote on the call the question motion. If the call the question motion passes, then at that point, we are going to go directly into voting on whether or not the amendment passes or fails. So that is what a call the question does.
Point of order.
Representative Miller, point of order.
Do we still have people on your list that wanted to speak who've not yet had any chance to do so?
There are people still on the list, but a call the question.
No, I understand, but the answer to that question has to do with whether or not I want to vote for or against calling a question.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Okay, so all those in favor of calling the question, please raise your right hand and keep it up. All those opposed, raise your right hand and keep it up. The call the question motion fails on a vote of 4-8. Representative Lee Hahn, would you like to ask any other questions, or are you finished?
No, sir, I'm good, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Representative. Representative Proctor.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On this, I think that we're pole vaulting over molehills here on what a state delegate is. I think anybody who's been involved in their individual party politics has a colloquial understanding of what that is. And as the reviser said in his comments, all the language that, all the language in the statute about how parties do internal party business has been progressively removed from the statute because it's up to the party how they pick their delegates. And I wouldn't want the Democrat Party having any say in how we do it. I'm sure they wouldn't want us having any say in how they do it. And so I think that this amounts to a delaying tactic.
All right, thank you, Representative. Representative Bourgeon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate the opportunity to ask questions about the bill that's before the committee.
Reminder, we are on the amendment, not the bill.
Well, okay. Thank you for that clarification. My understanding was that we were convening an entire convention, not just a small delegation of the party, but an entire, requiring the party to have a convention, which is convening each of the districts that make up each of the state parties. It's not a small group, is my understanding. Secondly, I wonder if there are other examples of where the state dictates to the party how they are rules on how they're to convene the election. For example, this balloon amendment is requiring a secret ballot. Are there examples in statute where the state is making those requirements of the state party? Is that something that's typically done?
Yes, Revisor Heim, if you could answer the question, please.
The procedures for basically party filling of vacancies are laid out in KSA 253901 through 3906, I think. There's a series of statutes, and they deal with basically county offices, district offices, state board of education offices, and the situation where the governor or lieutenant governor is unable to run, typically because of death, and so after the primary but before the general. So those statutes are on the books in terms of procedure.
Did that answer your question?
But do those statutes get into how the political party is to convene the election, or does it fall to party rules?
in terms of timelines and notice and so on, it gets into that. In terms of membership, it doesn't.
Thank you.
All right, Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to clarify something off of a previous speaker's comment. I believe when the reviser said this language came from an existing statute, he was talking about the unamended language. So some of the confusion that we've been speaking about, and I understand your intent on this, is are we diverging from that by talking about delegates? Whereas we know committeemen and women is a standardized position across the entire state, both parties. I think everyone's clear on that. I think the push for clarity is just on, is there an equivalent on delegate across both parties? And I, also, as a pretty active member of the Democratic Party, like my ranking member, I'm not entirely sure who would make up the equivalent of that in our party. So would appreciate the time there. And I would also just say, I hope if there's one thing we can all agree on in this committee, it's that the state of Kansas has spent far too much money on litigation regarding election laws. So while I understand this can get a little bit tedious, the goal is not to pass just what might be colloquially understood, but to make sure we are actually getting whatever statutes we pass as precise as possible, so that whether we like them or not, we're not spending a whole lot of time in court and resources that could go to other things. So I appreciate the second time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is strictly on the amendment. I know that's what we're talking about. My concern is that we still have a lot of questions regarding the amendment and how the wording is going to look, because we haven't been able to see it. We have had conceptual proposal of the amendment, but I know in other committees where we've had bills that were conceptual, they came out totally different, at least in the understanding or the discussion in what people thought was there and it wasn't there. So unlike another legislator that spoke, this is not trying to run around the issue. It is not a delay tactic. It is, as the speaker, the representative before me stated, this is about trying to get it right. And this is what I talked about on unintended consequences. And yes, we can always go back and correct it, but it makes us look pretty silly if we don't have our ducks in a row. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, I have nobody else listed on my list for debate. Is there anybody in the other room that has their hand up? Not seeing anybody. All right, so I'm going to begin my closing remarks. Basically, it's not a conceptual amendment other than the fact that we're replacing committeeman with state delegate. That's everything else is spelled out in here, so that makes it pretty simple as far as what the intent of this amendment is. And so with that, I move my amendment. All those in favor, please raise your right hand and keep it in the air. All those opposed, right hand. If you're in the other room and you have your hand up, can you wave your hand? Okay. All right. Let me do a recount here because I have a very small screen that I'm looking at for that second room. So it's going to sound a little weird, but we're going to do the ayes again one more time. Raise your hand. And for those of you in the second room, wave your hand so I can actually see them on the monitor. Okay. All those who are voting aye, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, that's not all 4 of them in the other room. Okay. All those opposed, raise your right hand. If you're in the second room, wave it. By my count, the vote is 6-6. The chairman votes, breaks the tie, and I vote aye. Okay. The bill has been amended. Further discussion on the bill. Representative Miller.
I don't know if we're going to try to move this out today, but I will just say that I do not have an amendment prepared, and I don't want to do it conceptual. But if the bill does come out today, I will have an amendment that will require an election for the upcoming election, be it odd or even years. So they would, if you're in your first year, and it will map the calendar out in any sort of amendment so we know precisely what time of the year. But if you're in your first year and there's still time available, for instance, this year, 2021, there will be a primary and there will be a general for municipal elections. But we could argue all day whether having the governor make the appointment or having a party convention make the appointment is better or worse. To me, having an actual election where all voters can participate is the best alternative. So again, if this gets out of committee, I will have a floor amendment. If we don't vote today, I'll get it ready before it comes out of committee. But it'll be an amendment to require that election even sooner than what's presently required in those situations where that might arise. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further discussion on the bill? Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up Representative Miller's comment, a week ago, I had requested a special election amendment to this bill. I haven't seen it yet. So again, if we intend to push this out today, I might put my head together with Representative Miller and we could try and address it on the floor. But if we're able to hold off, my preference would be for us to one way or another do that work in committee. I think the good discussion we have in here is ideal, but understand I'm just one vote on that. So if we move it out, we'd have that too, unless Revisor Heim has that ready, but I haven't received anything back. So I don't want to jump the gun on that.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think early in the discussion, the ranking D talked about delaying it until our next meeting. And that would allow all of the proper language to be seen and discussed. I think oftentimes when amendments are brought to the floor, the question is always, did you discuss it in the committee? And I think there's a need to complete this in the committee and have a discussion where all of us are on, the same page of what the amendment does. So I would just ask that we move to hold this over until Tuesday to complete our work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Is that a motion to table, Representative, to a date certain? I can't, your mic's muted. Your mic's muted.
Okay, now it's not. I'm sorry. I would move to move this to next Tuesday, which I think is what, February 16th, date certain, to complete the work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This is a motion to table. It does not require a second. It is also non-debatable. So committee, all those in favor of tabling this into a date certain, please raise your right hand. All those opposed? All right, so it looks like the motion carries, and I had 1, 2, I believe 8-4. So this bill has been tabled until next Tuesday.
And could we start with a working draft for next Tuesday with what we've done so far, rather than the original bill?
Revisor Heim, would that be possible for us to have the current language of this bill prepared for us to start fresh and reviewing it on Tuesday?
Sure. I also will mention that the Secretary of State's office has suggested an amendment that they think needs to be added to this bill. I can
Yes,
I assume-
you have my permission to draft that amendment, please, and thank you.
And I will do that. Representative Parker's amendment, I will also prepare as a separate amendment.
Okay, thank you, Revisor. Representative Parker, did you have your hand up? No, he's good. Okay. Representative Bishop.
Excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to suggest that if there is an amendment, conceptual or otherwise, written down, that includes the word state delegate, that term be defined.
I would encourage you between now and Tuesday to get with the revisor and have your amendments drafted, whatever the amendment is, and we will consider that on Tuesday. Just a reminder, committee, this bill was heard 2 weeks ago, so you should have had your amendments prepared before today. So by Tuesday, have all your amendments prepared. Thank you. All right. We are going to be moving to House Bill 2183. So everybody pull up House Bill 2183 if you have not already done so. All right, what is the will of the committee with House Bill 2183? Representative Berquist. Mike.
I move to approve 2183 acceptable to, pardon me, move it out to the full House for consideration.
Representative, is that a motion to pass out favorably House Bill 2183?
That's exactly what it is.
All right, thank you, Representative. Do I have a second? Second from Representative Dodson. Discussion from the committee. Not seeing any discussion. Representative Neighbor.
Just for clarification, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. Just for clarification, you have a balloon to this, is that correct?
There is a balloon amendment that the revisor has drafted and sent to the committee.
Okay, so we are talking about the basic bill or with the balloon in it?
We are talking about the base bill. No one has offered an amendment.
Okay, I'll wait then. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Miller.
I would move adoption of the balloon amendment. I'm not, I don't want to mislead people. There's other parts of this bill that make it fatally flawed for me, but the balloon amendment that was passed out, I think actually improves the bills. I would move that amendment.
Okay, I have a motion to amend House Bill 2183. Is there a second? I have a second from Representative Parker. Discussion on the balloon amendment. The balloon amendment, for those, if you have not seen it, it was emailed to you earlier today by the committee assistant, and it's striking the judicial branch under subsection B.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Revisor Heim.
I also need to strike some language in the title to go along with that amendment, which I missed. So, and judicial branch needs to be deleted from line 2.
Thank you, Revisor. Would you like to go ahead and, Representative Miller, reintroduce your amendment? Or amend it?
I would accept that as a friendly amendment. And actually, I think not only do we strike and the judicial branch, but then we have to impose an and where appropriate.
Okay.
The title.
So the motion is to strike the judicial branch language from line 2 and line 11 and subsequent makes sense. Is that approved by his current second, Representative Parker? Okay, that is approved. Okay, we are now debating removing the judicial branch as a part of this bill. Is there any discussion? If anybody in the second room has their hand up, make sure you wave it. Okay, not seeing any discussion. Okay, then those in favor, please signify. Nope. Okay. For those in the second room, please raise your hand. Representative Collins.
Yes, I just have a little, thank you, Mr. Chair, for acknowledging me. I'm have a little problem with striking judicial branch from altering election laws. When the judicial branch interprets laws, it's not their job to alter the laws. Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none. Okay. All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye and keeping your hand. Apologies, Representative, go ahead and close.
That's all right. I've been run over worse than that before. I don't have any real heartburn with the current language. I offered the amendment because I think it's less misleading in convincing ourselves that we have control over what the judicial branch does. They have the powers that they have, and they will retain those powers regardless of what law we pass. Unless we modify the Constitution, the judicial branch has certain powers inherent in the Constitution, and they will maintain those regardless. If we pass a law that said the judicial branch shall never do anything again, it would have no force or effect unless we modified the Constitution. I think we're fooling ourselves, or maybe fooling other people by putting this language in here thinking that the courts won't be ruling on election cases. They still will, and they'll only be able to do what they are legally do, and we are not going to change that through legislation. So that's my purpose of offering the amendment. Again, I don't think it, even if it passed in the current form without the amendment, it's going to change anything. I just think it's more straightforward to do that, and I move my motion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You've heard the motion. All in favor, please raise your right hand and keep it in the air. Okay. All those opposed, please raise your right hand and keep it in the air. By my count, it is 5 yes, 7 no. Amendment fails. We're back on the bill. Representative Miller.
And as I noted earlier, Mr. Chairman, the fatal part of this bill that I have a problem with is this language in Section 2 that says KSA 25-622 is hereby repealed. That's a very short statute, and it was read the other day, but for people's memory, it reads, ballot distribution in times of disasters or emergencies. The Secretary of State may designate temporary alternative methods for the distribution of ballots in cases of war, natural or man-made disasters, equipment failures, or other emergency conditions or circumstances which make it impossible for voters in a voting area to obtain ballots as provided by law. And even if you supported the other sections of this bill, I don't know why you would favor repealing that particular statute. It's there for not a good reason, it's there for an excellent reason, and that is stuff happens. Equipment failures, power goes out after a simple thunderstorm. It makes it impossible for these machines to operate, and there has to be an ability, in this case, for our top election official to be able to adapt to the emergency, and I can't for the life of me understand why it is we're trying to repeal that statute. It was put there for a good reason. It remains there for a good reason, and therefore I oppose passage of this bill in its current form. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The previous representative made an excellent point because we don't know when these disasters occur, what it's going to involve. And if this in any way disrupts an election or takes away the right of any voter, either going to a poll or doing it from home or doing the disabled or anything like that, I think that's wrong. And I would like to amend where we remove Section 2 from House Bill 2183. I think it goes a little bit too far. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, just for simplicity purposes, basically you're wanting to remove line 18 from the bill, correct?
That is correct. Thank you.
Okay, is there a second? Second from Representative Parker. Discussion on the neighbor amendment. Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just reiterate the points that have already been made, but I do think one thing that came to mind as we were looking at repealing that is I think about what that potentially means for some of our rural communities. You know, if there's an issue with a polling site in Johnson County or Sedgwick County or Wyandotte County, one of our urban areas, there are some alternatives pretty readily available, whereas one of our smaller rural towns or communities, if there's a natural disaster, that might mean that the options for alternative polling places are not available for many, many miles, as opposed to in my neighborhood where, you know, I might drive a mile further down the road to an alternative precinct site. So out of an abundance of caution, just to be prepared for those types of emergencies moving forward, I think it's pretty common sense to go ahead and leave those precautions in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Proctor.
Mr. Chair, I would just remind my fellow committee members of a couple things. First, from the testimony on the hearing on this bill, we heard the Secretary of State's office say that the county clerks have wide latitude, regardless of this statute that they're that's mentioned that they're trying to strike from this bill as being repealed. They have wide latitude to do things to ensure that folks have the opportunity to vote. But also I would say to those folks that say, well, we have to grant broad emergency powers to people without checks and balances, I would refer them to the first few months of this pandemic when the governor was exercising unchecked executive power until we were able to do something with a statute to insert the county commissions in that process. Yeah, the best intentions in the world can be abused. Thank you.
Representative Berquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill, I believe this bill needs to move out without amendment for the exact reasons that Representative Proctor has mentioned. The powers of the counties are already there, and we don't need the extra power at the state level. I hope that you'll vote this amendment down.
Representative Lehan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I concur with both of my colleagues. I feel like these emergency powers have been exploited, and that as someone who lives in a rural area, a very rural area, we might be country, but we're pretty resourceful. We'll figure it out.
Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is one issue. We are not giving broad powers to do anything else. The issue here is we've had wildfires out in parts of Kansas, and they've been devastating. we've had floods, and we've had major snowstorms where people can't get around. And when that comes up next, and it's a time of voting, what are we going to do? I hope we don't disenfranchise or disable people from making it to the polls to vote and suppress that vote. Yes, Johnson County can take care of themselves, Wichita probably can too. But if you look at the disasters that have happened in western Kansas, they have not been small, they have been costly, and I think in this particular area, it is not broadening the powers per se, it is making sure that there is no voter suppression in areas that could suffer from major disasters. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Miller.
Well, this particular statute is limited to the Secretary of State only. We're not talking about on this amendment, we're not talking about the governor. We're talking about the Secretary of State. As old as I am, in my lifetime, that's always been a Republican. So if we're really fearful about what our Republican Secretary of States are going to do, maybe we need to rein in some of their current powers. But as far as this statute being exploited, as was referenced just a moment ago, you may recall the testimony of the Secretary of State when we had a hearing on this bill, and they were hard-pressed to remember the last time they ever even utilized it. It is there to be applied in those rare instances of disasters and emergencies. I trust the Secretary of State, the top election official in this state, to be able to know when such a case has arisen that extraordinary steps need to be taken to assure that people get to vote. That's what we're talking about, assuring people's right to vote in cases of disasters or emergencies. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Toplicker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The issues that have been brought up about removing Section 2 are basically the answer to these questions about disasters and how to get ballots out during emergencies. That's the language in the bill solves that problem. It just says, without specific approval of such consent decree by the Legislative Coordinating Council, problem solved. Secretary of State gets the consent of the LCC, and it's a done deal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Miller.
Well, I apologize for speaking again, but with all due respect to the representative, the section he was referring to only relates to consent decrees that involve courts. This is not a similar situation. It's that section addresses consent decrees where the Secretary of State has entered into a decree with a court, and then the Secretary of State has to get approval of the Coordinating Council. It does not address the situation we've been discussing. With all due respect, I disagree.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? All right, I am not, Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will you do me a favor? My hearing's not good. Could I hear the amendment one more time?
The amendment is striking everything in line 18 of the bill.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Wow. All right, seeing no further discussion, all those in favor of striking Section 2, which is repealing, that's the repeal of KSA 25-622 and the emergency powers of the Secretary of State. It's removing that, so it's keeping that in place. So if you want to remove that and keep that in place, you'll vote aye. If not, you'll vote no to keep it inside the bill, to repeal that statute. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye or raising your right hand and keeping them in the air. 1, 2. This is to repeal. So it's to strike the emergency powers portion. Okay. Let me re-clarify so we're all on the same page here. Section 2 is the emergency powers, which currently apply to the Secretary of State. If you leave it in, it repeals those emergency powers. So if you vote aye, you're voting to keep the emergency powers in place for the Secretary of State. If you vote no on this amendment, you're keeping the language in the bill, and it is repealing those emergency powers for the Secretary of State. So that is what the amendment does. So if you vote aye, it keeps the emergency powers. If you vote no, it repeals it. All in favor, please signify by raising your right hand.
Mr. Chairman, as a point of order.
Yeah. Hold on. What's the point of order first?
Point of order is that Representative Bishop made a motion to strike the line 18.
It was Representative Neighbor.
Okay. Representative Neighbor, that's what we're voting on.
Yes.
Correct? So striking the line is what we're talking about. And
so if you vote yes, then you're striking that line from the bill.
Okay.
Okay, all those who are opposed vote no.
That's a point of order.
All right, point of order from the other room. Whoever said it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to, before we vote on this, make a poll of who is actually in the building and eligible to vote on this.
Everybody's in the building and eligible to vote, both Representatives Neighbor and Parker in their offices. Is that correct? That is correct. So they're both in the building and are eligible to vote. Okay, all those who are opposed, raise your right hand and keep it in the air.
The line. I'm not going to strike the line.
Okay, so we have an issue. There's somebody who voted twice, yes and no. So we're going to start over. This strikes the language. It amends the language. A yes vote strikes the current language and amends what's in there and keeping the powers. A no vote repeals the emergency powers for the Secretary of State. All those who are in favor, please raise your right hand. Aye, if you are. Okay. All those opposed, please raise your right hand. By my count, the amendment passes 7-5. Section 2 is deleted. All right, we're back on the bill. Any further discussion? All right, seeing none. Representative Berquist, do you wish to renew your motion?
Yes. I move that we move 2183 out favorably for passage as amended.
Looking for a second? Representative Dodson is the second. All those in favor, please signify by raising your right hand and keeping it in the air. All right, all those opposed, please raise your right hand, keep it in the air. By my count, the ayes are 9, the nays are 3. The ayes have it, it passes. All right, committee. Just for the good of the committee here, I'm going to make a few comments. For the future, let's all try to make sure that we do a little bit better of a job on trying to do less conceptual amendments. So please have your amendments prepared before committee so that we can try to cut down on some confusion. And additionally, make sure you have your amendments prepared for next Tuesday. With that, the committee is adjourned.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Heim, before we adjourn, real quick.
just a comment about, I heard a request for a definition of who's going to be part of the state party. Want a definition of whatever, of the Democrat and the Republican. I don't think that's a particularly great idea to put in legislation. I will do it if that's the will of the committee.
I would encourage all committee members to go work with a revisor on language that you feel appropriate for that bill for next Tuesday. And then we will hammer out that language here in committee. Representative Miller.
I just want to clarify what he just said, because he said he would do it if that was the will of the committee. Actually, if a committee member requests a specific amendment and that request involves a definition of delegate, he doesn't have to come up with the definition, but if someone gives him a definition, tells him to draft it, it's not subject to the committee's will.
That is correct.
I agree with that. I didn't mean to imply that I wouldn't draft the thing. I just warning people that I think in the past, the idea was to keep that kind of language about parties out of the statutes.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, committee, we are adjourned.